Without major delay, because indeed we are very interested in listening to our experts, Ms. Annelene Bremer, Senior Policy Officer on Rural Development, Land Rights and Forestry at BMZ, coming this morning from Germany with some of you colleagues. And of course, as I was telling you before, co-organizer and the technical and financial partner, which we were very pleased. I had myself a lot of pleasure working with you colleagues here in Brussels, as well as in country. So thank you very much again. The last one we organized together was on the private sector, and the PPP is in the same room. So I think it's as relevant as LINK, the one of today. So thank you, Ms. Bremer.
Thank you, Isolina. Excellencies, Mr. Olusola Ojo of the ACP Secretariat, and Mr. Michael Helu, the Director of CTA, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, I would like to thank the ACP ambassadors and the ACP Secretariat for hosting us here today. We would also like to thank CTA, as well as the European Commission and Concord, for the opportunity to co-organize the event, this briefing with you this afternoon. We cherish the close collaboration that we have both with the ACP and with the European Commission here in Brussels, as you mentioned, and in many of our partner countries in the field of rural development, and especially on topics such as nutrition, land rights, land governance, and also value chain development. For us in BMZ, the topic of rural livelihoods and rural transformation is very relevant. We acknowledge that rural areas around the world are changing, but they're not all changing in the same way. They take different paths, and these paths, they differ between regions, and they differ even within countries. And the form that rural transformation takes and the speed at which it progresses depends to an extent on the attention that rural transformation receives among policymakers. On the one hand, we've seen that the divide between urban areas and rural areas is slowly fading and closing. And this is also increasingly recognized by policymakers. And one example is that at the Habitat 3 conference in Quito last year, the new urban agenda has emphasized now for the first time that there are very strong linkages and interconnections of rural and urban areas, and that there's need to develop more integrated approaches, actually bringing urban and rural areas closer together, and integrated approaches to sustainable development. And as much as the rural-urban divide is fading, still there are very large differences, and there's still spatial inequality between rural and urban areas. So this is, I think, an area that requires our attention. Looking at Africa, it is crucial that, as also Mr. Ojo mentioned, the small and medium towns and urban agglomerations are supported to function as service hubs for the surrounding rural areas, and to make even the rural areas more attractive places to live in, and especially also for the young people and the rural youth. And the second aspect that we find is very important is the agricultural sector. It will remain key to rural transformation in many African countries for the coming decades. It will continue to provide employment and income for parts of the population, and it also holds tremendous potential for non-farm economic activity in the food-related services and processing industries. So on the ground in our partner countries in Africa, as BMZ, we have a long-term commitment, and we now place additional emphasis on rural development through our One World, No Hunger initiative. Germany assists partner countries, especially in Africa, in creating development options for the rural population so that rural transformation happens in a socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable way. One case will be presented by my colleague Petra Jacobi of GIZ later this afternoon. Germany seeks to strengthen sustainable agricultural policies and rural economic development in partner countries. We seek to support investment in rural areas and in small towns, and to foster the development of decentralized institutions in order to make agriculture more productive and to help create jobs within and outside the agricultural sector. Jobs will also be one of the main challenges for the African continent in the coming decades. As we've heard, the numbers of young men and women entering the labor market every year are already overwhelming. We all need to work together to make sure that this youth bulge is better absorbed by the labor market and to create job opportunities so that we can ensure stability and peace in rural areas and in whole regions. And the topic of youth employment has been selected, as Isolina mentioned, as one of the main topics for our G20 presidency. You know that Germany has the G20 presidency this year. In our development working group, we've selected this as the topic that we want to work on, and we are proposing a G20 initiative for rural youth employment and agricultural innovation as one of the key deliverables of the G20 development working group. We think that we need a new vision for rural areas and rural development that goes beyond economic transformation and considers how rural areas can be attractive to live in and to work in, especially for young people. BMZ has invited leading development experts and civil society, as well as private sector and youth, to embark on a participatory process to develop what we call a charter for rural development, the Berlin Charter. And we are inviting people around the world to give us their views and to contribute to the document via an e-consultation, an online consultation on the internet. And we are starting this online consultation, in fact, today. And I'm inviting you here today to also participate and to become part of it. The website is already up there. It's www.bmz.de/Berlin Charter. And on this website, for the coming 2 weeks, we will be seeking to have a dialogue with you and get your insights. And once this charter is drafted, it will be finalized in a high-level conference in Berlin at the end of April, on the 27th and the 28th of April. We will be having a conference that is titled One World, No Hunger, Future of the Rural World. And this will prominently feature the perspectives and needs of the young generation. We also need to rethink the way we work together. I think it's not just about what we support, but also how we support our partner countries. And we think that we need to work better together, better with our African partners, as well as other stakeholders to meet the current challenges. We need to support our partner governments better and to target our interventions even better, to create conducive framework conditions and enable the private sector to create jobs, because we think that the private sector can actually do it best. Not the public sector, not the civil society, it's the private sector that needs to actually create jobs for all these young people. We need a new era of partnership with Africa at a time when the modalities of cooperation with Africa are also discussed here in Brussels at the EU level. And a new framework document, the European External Investment Plan, is being reviewed, so we think it's high time that we actually also look at the how of working together. In light of the transformation processes that are taking place in many African countries, we need specific and place-based approaches to rural development, territorial approaches that actually look across different sectors, landscape approaches that are driven by our partner countries, because they seem to be the most promising way to manage the complexity of making rural areas places of livelihoods and making them attractive for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annelene. Thank you again for the cooperation. I'm sure that some of the discussions we have today, some of the outcomes, you will feature them as well on the G20 process, and most of them are extremely relevant to all the discussions we will have today.